I welcome everybody to the session. I think we can get going. I want to thank you very much for attending this session of Disability, Women, Youth and Employment. My name is Maureen Hahn. I am the President and CEO of the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, CCRW. I am also a steering committee member. And it is my great pleasure to be able to introduce to you Bonnie Brayton. Bonnie is the National Executive Director of DAWN Canada, the Disabled Women's Network of Canada. CCRW and DAWN have done a lot of work together and continue to do a lot of work together in order to break down barriers and to promote the employment of women and young women with disabilities. So it's my great pleasure to introduce my fine friend, Bonnie Brayton, to moderate this panel. So over to you, Bonnie.
Thank you so much, Maureen, and thank you very much for allowing us to do this really wonderful session with your team and our team together, which is really kind of what this whole session is about, is what is the work that we've been doing together and what are the opportunities. And so I'm also really pleased, of course, to have from your team, Tara Steeves, the Youth Futures National Supervisor, and Paz Arellano, who has been the rock at the YTF site in Montreal, who's joining us, and Yasmin Pincer from our team, who's our Youth Initiatives Coordinator, along with you and I, and of course our audience. So yes, I'm really happy to be here and agree with you that it is really important, like I said, for people to understand that this is not the work that DAWN and CCRW are doing, but that we are leading and that we are hoping, to see a lot more uptake from the other conferences around this activity and some of the other things we're trying to do to get a really strong focus on the reality that there's a much higher unemployment rate of women with disabilities than pretty much anybody else in this country, but it's largely been ignored up to now and has not been addressed. So thanks, Maureen. On that basis, and again, to kick us off, to remind people who are here, is that we've had a project called Youth the Futures in partnership with CCRW. Again, it's their lead project, but we are the site in Montreal, and that the partnership with CCRW has allowed us to be, if you will, beside them as they've been developing a really unique site in Montreal that has been completely focused on the employment needs of young women with disabilities. And so, as I said, because we're moving now into the next phase of this work, we have a new government and some exciting new initiatives in front of us. We thought it was a wonderful opportunity to bring this team and group of people together to look back and to start looking forward. So without further ado, I'm going to actually switch to my role as the moderator with this panel to ask some questions of the folks that I've just introduced you to. So this question is for Tara, Anna, and Yasmin. And the first question I wanted to ask each of you to think about and give us a bit of a response on, which is this: 4 years into this project, what are your observations concerning the YTF in Montreal? And I guess for Tara in particular, and or the other YTF locations where Tara's also had a chance to see the mixed gender sites against the one in Montreal. So I don't want to start off with you, Tara. I'll let us start perhaps with Anna, and then we'll go to you and then over to Yasmin, who's the newest person in this, on our team to the project. Thanks very much.
Hi, everybody. It's such an honor to be here to discuss with DAWN and CCRW and everybody who is here. So just a really quick background on our project, Youth the Future, that is across Canada. We just opened up a couple of new sites and we're super excited about that. But for the last 3 years, it's mostly been in the Maritimes, our one site in Quebec, as well as Ontario. And so Youth the Future is a pre-employment skills training for youth between 15 and 30, youth who identify as having a disability and are looking to find meaningful entry-level employment. So here in Montreal, as Bonnie had mentioned, we work specifically with young women, as well as trans feminine and non-binary youth who are at ease in a group context where the experience that we prioritize and reference are those of young women with disabilities. So in this project, we're working on setting them up for the working world, which means we're doing job search skills and strategies. But a really big thing that we have found, and again, I speak here from Montreal, and Tara will speak later on the other YTF sites, is the importance of those other soft skills that are really life skills. So on one hand, employment context, leadership, teamwork, effective communication, that's so important for all of us. But then we're also talking about confidence building and the importance of this. And when we're talking about women, young women with disabilities, young women, mostly around, I'd say the average is about 22 years old. That's when all of us are just discovering ourselves. What are we great at? What are we good at? But when we're talking about young women with disabilities, it's realizing that that voice is not always heard. And when you're talking about young women as well, you know, we grow up in a society where our voices are not so much heard, even from elementary school. And so we're relearning and building on these skills that lead to that confidence in life in general, but then also moving towards meaningful employment. So that's a lot of what we've learned on site, what we have to build into those first 8 weeks so that we feel confident to go into those job interviews, so that we feel confident speaking up, advocating, hey, this is my disability, or this is what I need because of my disability, so that I can do my job to the best of my ability. So that's what that's kind of the base of what we've learned over the last couple of years, but there's so much. So I'm just going to throw a little bit of some of the facts that we have in particular that really might be specific to, yeah, exactly, that illustrate the specificities of not just Montreal, but I think a program that's geared for young women with disabilities, and some of the difficulties that have made that are our reality.
Thank you.
So some of them being we have a constant difficulty in recruiting compared to other sites. It is because maybe half the population is not addressed, and you know we concentrate on young women because they are underserved. We know this, and I will probably reference a lot of facts in Dawn's More Than a Footnote publication that came out in 2019, which is so great. Love being your partner. And it is that young women and girls are underserved by a lot of community agencies or undersupported. And so how do we find our girls for the program, and the difficulty that is that makes it to recruit. We also know over the years that women more than men are more likely to be caregivers or lone parents, which then does affect the responsibilities that participants have, their ability to show up to the program, but then also later on to work, the consistency in that as well, and trying to find a balance. So that is another reality that we have found in Montreal. Another big one is gender-based violence and trauma, just the effect of that, and then the traumas resulting from such experiences. Also affecting participants' ability to remain in the program, and then to successfully find or retain employment in a safe space where they feel safe, where they feel confident to voice their needs. We also know that women with disabilities, more than men with disabilities, are more likely to be living at or under the poverty line, which means that sometimes it's their priorities to survive that have to take over. So maybe staying in the program is more difficult, and we have to shift to accommodate for those priorities. And we also know, and the reality too is that yes, Montreal is a transient city. We have a lot of artists, and that's really, really great. But we found, as well as in statistics, we know that women with disabilities are more likely than men to live alone. So moving to a new city, maybe being a newcomer to a new city, an immigrant, and then having to navigate that by yourself as a young person, as well as living with a disability, also makes it difficult to get into the let me find a job mode. How can I keep this job? And then we also know that women immigrants have a lower employment rate than male immigrants. And maybe this is linked, this can be linked to then having less job experience, to make you marketable. Also, then we have to add the layer of language. Here in Montreal, we have English and French, and not everybody is bilingual, and that's very, very normal as well. If we can relate it to other cities in Canada, if you're a newcomer to the country, it might be difficult as well, you know, with English and French. So these are some of the
Quick question,
facts.
Anna.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, I know just anecdotally from being beside you guys as you were running the program, that one of the other challenges that we've noted for women with disabilities is transportation, including safety in transportation. And that this is another issue that I think there's a real opportunity for us to begin to address that going forward, especially like you said, referring back to Dawn Canada's research. More than a footnote is a very deliberate way of framing the issue, which is that policy is not including us. We're being footnoted in transportation policies. We're being footnoted in a lot of these important decisions. We're not participating in them. So I really want to thank you for bringing those ones up. And I was just wondering again, because you didn't touch on it, and we're going to bring it back, about childcare.
Yes, that was like my last point. I know I went through so many, but I couldn't. And I'm excited that we will be able to talk about that later. The fact that the reality of childcare or caregiving for elderly parents or for other people who are for other people with disabilities in their network, that has also been difficult. And we've been able to, in the second leg of YTF, since we're in our second version now, allow for supports in that, these wraparound supports that are so important, because we have to take them into account and not just have that as a, oh, by the way, this might happen. It should be like, if this happens, when this happens, we are ready as a program to be able to support you with that, or to point you towards a resource that is affordable, accessible, and safe.
Well, I was going to say, I know we have a French interpreter, so I'm going to take advantage and I'm going to say something in French. So anybody who needs translation, je vais prendre cette opportunité aussi, Anna, de parler un peu de la situation au Québec, où on a déjà des systèmes, we have childcare, tu sais, mais au niveau de l'accessibilité, ça n'existe pas. Donc, je pense que c'est aussi important de souligner que même qu'on a, tu sais, un programme extraordinaire au Québec au niveau de pouvoir donner l'accès au niveau de coût, l'accessibilité au niveau de les mères en situation de handicap et ou les enfants en situation de handicap n'est toujours pas réglée. Alors, je reste juste à nous donner ça. I just want to pin that down as an important thing for us to remember also, which is that we're very proud of what we have in Quebec in terms of the feminist work that's been done to provide affordable childcare. But the new initiative from the federal government we're going to be talking about takes it the step further it needs to go. Tara, can I ask you to jump in now and give us some of your thoughts? We know you've been going across the country and meeting with the other sites and the other teams, so we'd love to hear more from you about all of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. It would be my sincere honor. So as one of the national directors for the Youth the Future program for the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, I have the privilege of working with the site in Montreal, as well as I oversee Vancouver, St. John's, Newfoundland, Montreal, and new to us is Iqaluit, Nunavut. All bring unique roles to the stage when it comes to culture and diversity. And it is exciting to see some of the things that are happening in each community across the country. We have other sites as well in Winnipeg, Charlottetown, Moncton, and Halifax. And as well as sites in Ontario. We have 4 sites in Ontario. But to your question, Bonnie, when you say, you know, in the 4 years of the project, what are some of our observations concerning the Youth the Future, or that we have seen in Youth the Future in Montreal and across the country? So I've done some digging and looked at some of our stats. It's some of the things that we are doing for not just young women, but young men and people who identify as other across the country, is that obviously we are working with them on their unique barriers or disabilities. as of right now, within the program longevity, we have seen 38 unique different disabilities represented amongst the population that we have served. Many of them are, many may have the same disability, but we have seen 38 different unique disabilities. Within that, we have seen an increase in anxiety and depression when it comes to COVID-related barriers. And we might speak to that a little bit later in one of your other questions. We have seen a lower number of individuals coming into the program that have had a lower number of developmental assets, maybe not even particularly pertaining to their disability, but society, maybe education, maybe different things, but impacted on that with people with disabilities, it compounds it. And we want to address that and have been addressing that. And I believe some of the statistics we have are pretty exciting. I'm excited to share them here today. Our program engagement is seeing results, and we have expanded just recently into 4 new sites across the country where we're targeting looks at things that maybe we're seeing gaps that are missing, maybe gaps that Dawn has brought to the forefront of what we're missing for young women. What we are seeing across the board, I mean, we're seeing an increase of young men as well that are single parents, that are having the children, one day or half the time, and they also are impacted by childcare. We're seeing increasing different barriers arise, and we're combating that through being able to teach, offer resources, offer assessments for the individuals on how we can properly provide the resources and needs and wraparound supports that each client that we serve within the program could benefit from. Some of our stats that we are seeing right now, and as Anna has so eloquently said, it is difficult to get young women enrolled or applied, the referrals in. We have worked very hard at trying to make sure that we are maintaining a balance as much as we possibly can across the country. And in calculating the stats this morning, I am looking that we have for women are at 48% of our clients that we have seen right now have been women. 54 have been young men, and 2% represent as other. So we're seeing that really kind of close, which that is very exciting. We are doing more to be able to bring those, I guess, market to women and the things that we can do as well. 61% of our individuals that have come to us that have disabilities have represented themselves as low income across the board, men, women, and other. Low literacy is at 35%, and we're combating some of that, seeing some of our participants maybe not getting employed, but going back to school to just get those fundamentals that they need. Anxiety and depression is at a whopping 76% of our participants have identified as having anxiety or depression on top of their disability that they.
And I guess, Tara, like I said, what I find will be interesting over the long term, and it's not the kind of data we have now, will be the kind of data that Dawn's been looking at for a long time, which is, well, we may see, and this is great news, this increase in the number of young women participants and non-binary participants, but it's going to be ultimately about retention.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the retention issue is the big one, right? It's the big one that is played out because of these other issues, childcare, other responsibilities that often, like I said, a lone parent carries in the family. So if it's okay with you, I'm actually going to pivot to Yasmin.
Absolutely.
Actually, for a minute, because I do think, like I said, Yasmin, there's a lot you can add. First of all, with the fresh eyes, because you came into our program last year when our Nellie Basili went on her mat leave, and we're so glad you've joined the team. But like I said, I've also really appreciated the fresh perspective you've given us. So I don't know if you need me to repeat the question. I know you know what it is. So if you want to just jump in, Yasmin, please do.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I would like to say I'm really excited to be here, and thank you, Anna and Tara, like really comprehensive information. I think my observation as Anna was speaking, especially describing what the YTF project is about, I was nodding heavily because I'm a neuroqueer immigrant woman, and I know like most of the difficulties that she was listing there, like, yes, I have experienced those.
Yeah.
And what I have done as part of a Dawn representative with YTF was I met with the YTF participants, these young women and gender diverse people with disabilities, and I conducted a few workshops with them on disability, multi-disability, accessibility, intersectionalism, and our goal with all of this was to help them understand themselves better, talk about it better, grow a deeper understanding of other people, the differences that others might be experiencing, and work on accessibility needs and how to talk about these. And now I would like to give an example. I was very impressed by this one. As Anna said, they prepare all these participants. I have done a couple of workshops, but Anna and her colleagues are constantly working with these people throughout those 8 weeks. And I think it was maybe 7th week, 6th week, I don't remember. And I did a mock interview, and I was the interviewer. I pretended to be a tough employer. And as part of the interview session, I asked them, what are your weaknesses and strengths? And I hate this question, but I had to. And I was very impressed by this one participant. They all did a great job, but I just would like to talk about this one participant. She's on the spectrum. And for her strength, she said she is great. She's very detail oriented, and she is great with numbers. So if there are any numbers that she needs to keep up with, she'll keep it in mind and she'll make sure it's going to get done. That's a perfect way of putting it. And as for her weakness, she did not say weakness. She said, I sometimes have difficulty reading between the lines. When something is implied, I may not be able to understand it. So if there's something that you would like to tell me, a comment, a criticism, whatever it is, please do tell me directly. I do not mind. I appreciate it. And it actually gives me the tools for me to better my work. And I loved the way she put it. She had this great understanding of what her disability is, how to express it, the tools to express it in an ableist world that would help her get acceptance and to advocate for herself. So this was a very impressive moment, and I had actually wished that, like, I wish I had those when I was, going into the job market. So this is all I want to add for the moment.
Well, listen, I was going to say, before we move to the second segment where we start to look forward, something that's standing out for me that I didn't really ask any of you about, but that has really been a core part of the work Dawn Canada has been doing, has been, sorry, my hotel phone room rang. I have to hang it up. I don't know who it was, and I hope they don't call back. Was to ask you guys about something that, like I said, is really centered in our work, which is to recognize that one of the biggest challenges is the absence of peer support. And how much peer support means in the space you've got these folks in, but in general, what it means for women and girls and non-binary people with disabilities, because this is a huge problem. We're not represented, we're not at the table because we don't have strong peer groups, and we don't find ourselves in a strong enough space to be doing anything except self-advocacy, right? And self-advocacy isn't positive, right? It's always a relationship where you're asking. Like you said, Yasmin, it's exciting to hear that some of the skills the young women are starting to acquire are those that become the ones for self-advocacy, but also that become valuable because, again, Tara, you mentioned 38 different kinds of disabilities. It's our ability to deepen our knowledge across the YTF program about those specificities too, because they become so important, because accommodation happens at an individual level. Right? Inclusion happens at an individual level. There are practices we can use but I think that's important. I'd just like to hear from each of you a little bit about what I've just said, some thoughts. I'll go to you first, Anna, then I'll switch it up. I'll go Yasmin, and Tara, I'll ask you to finish up before we move to the next segment. Thanks.
It's a great thing, actually, that you're pointing out, Bonnie, because for us, when we're recruiting and doing our selection interviews and speaking to potential participants, we do talk to them about this wonderful space that we get to create with the participants, seeing the same people through the 8 weeks where they come in every day and do workshops and learn about themselves, but they're also learning from each other. And as has been mentioned, we have a variety of disabilities that are represented. Some people have several disabilities, and to know, hey, I'm not the only one, and as well acknowledging that sometimes people are isolated. Often people are isolated in disability. They might be the only person in their family. They might be the only person at their school. But to come to a space where they can talk with other youth and say, hey, this has been difficult for me. This is how I deal with it, and learn from each other and just have that space to share. It really, this sense of camaraderie is also so motivating. They get to motivate each other for those very difficult weeks. Some of them have more experience in the professional world than others, and then they get to learn that way. But it's such an enriching experience. And I learn every cohort. I learn so much about the realities, the difficult realities, but also the creative ways that people have, the resilience that our participants have, that they give to each other, really.
You said my magic word because you said resilience. Yasmin, over to you, and then Tara. And I'm writing down resilience because it's something we'll bring back. Thank you.
And among my notes, I had written camaraderie. Like, that is the word that I would go. I know resilience is important, but yeah. So that is what I observed as well when we were doing those workshops. We were talking about accessibility and the different disabilities. Some of them, like a couple of them, had the same disabilities, but they had different experiences. And sharing these helped them understand better what other experiences are, what different needs may be, and bring that sensibility into the workforce when they continue. So like, we are actually also doing the basis to change, to do a positive change in the society.
One of our participants put something in the chat box, and I think it's a nice articulation of this, Yasmin, which was emancipation, right? There's an emancipation that comes through that peer support space, that common experience. Tara.
We're not only seeing it in person, but because COVID has just thrown us into the virtual world far quicker than probably any of us anticipated, we're seeing young women and men be able to connect across the country, across the globe, and be able to see that they are not alone in their fears, anxieties, the things that they have, that they feel when they lay their head on their pillow at night, that there's other people. And we all know that with the developmental assets, part of that, a huge part of that is community. And that's one thing that we really try to foster is community, is wrapping people around and saying, it's okay to feel that way. And I feel that way too. And just feeling that sense of normalcy and how you're feeling this and the chaos and in the world can bring a reduced level of anxiety for individuals. And we see it time and time again. I know I can say Anna and the team there in Montreal have said just the chatting around the lunchroom table makes a huge difference. We're not necessarily talking about the disabilities. We're talking about being human and just being caring individuals within community. But to answer your question, Bonnie, is those wraparound supports, getting them engaged in the community, finding different resources for them, giving platforms for them to be able to not feel isolated and alone, offering stability so they can maybe move out of situations where maybe they're experiencing violence and insecurity, food insecurity, those different things. It's an exciting process to see people engage in that and grow. But
I guess I want to say something, because the resilience word and the work Dawn's been doing around this idea of rooting resilience.
Mm.
And I think it's how we move to the next question too, which is there's a lot of power out of what's coming out of the YTF program, but it's only there as long as we're there, is what it feels like right now. As long as Dawn and CCRW are holding this, it's there, but we know how fragile that is, right? How fragile it can be, and how as individuals, these folks are relying on us to create that space for them. And so it is about how we root this resilience that we're hearing, how we root it in a way that it's beyond CCRW and Dawn's work and beyond the individual who is, again, you know, coming from a place of resilience as an individual is about your personal fight. Coming at resilience from a shared perspective or peer support place is a very different one, because then it's empowering, because you have a common agenda. I'm quite sure one of the things that I would hear from Anna if I asked her is that there's always one person in every class that you know that if you leaned in and gave her the extra resources, she has the potential to be a leader. She's too busy in her daily life right now with her struggle, but if we gave her the support, she would be. Maureen, come back on camera, because I want to talk about something that is a little outside of this, but important.
All right.
During last year, when MAID discussions were going on and C7 was coming forward, one of the things that was really clear to me from some of the women who were as close to wanting to access MAID as they were to anything else was that there was always in every one of these women the possibility, had they been supported, were they in an environment where they had what they needed, they would be leaders and they would be mentoring other women with disabilities instead of being at the point of wanting to give up on their lives.
Yes.
And so it's not to say that it's not about employment, but it is so much deeper and more profound for women with disabilities, because there has been so little for them to be hopeful about because of gender-based violence, because of poverty, because of unemployment. But we are, and I think it's something I've heard it in a lot of different spaces I've been in over the last few days, with the pandemic and with the new government actually in a place where we could perhaps be hopeful for a minute. So with that, I'm actually going to move to the question, Maureen, and I'm going to put it to you first, right? So here's my question. Looking at some of the big commitments made by the federal government, including the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, including the Accessible Canada Act, including the National Housing Strategy, and perhaps most exciting of all, Maureen, the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Plan. All of these big, fat, hopeful initiatives that our government has in their hands, and we're standing beside them. How do we mobilize what we've learned so far with YTF in Montreal across Canada against these instruments of hope, my friend? How do we engage with the larger community, with some of the other people in this audience that are at your conference, so we stop just looking at these things and we start to get really serious about how we do a convergence of these incredible opportunities to change the lives of women and girls with disabilities?
Wow. You know, never the easy questions from Bonnie, but you know, and my answer might sound trite, but it has to be that we're doing this together, and that we're doing this purposefully. We're doing this mindfully. We're doing this with an appropriate framework of intersectionality that is that can be used and utilized and mimicked, right? That once it applies to one. So and Bonnie, you and I have talked about this before, that if I'm at the table, I'm going to make sure, and I've made a pledge to make sure that that anything about gender-based violence, anything about an intersectional framework, I've made that pledge that I will make sure that I carry that forward. And you've made a pledge that when you're at a table, at a feminist table, or at a table that is not necessarily about disability, that you will talk about women and disability and work. And so I think that the more people that can make that pledge, then when the consultations and the engagements happen about all of these really big, great initiatives, that the framework is set up on an intersectional framework. Because if we're all saying it again and again and again, we can't be ignored.
Yeah. So Anna, I'm going to turn to you next, and I'm going to say something too, just to remind our audience that we're in the middle of the 12 and 16 days to end gender-based violence across the globe right now. We've just wrapped up Indigenous Disability Awareness Month. Tomorrow is International Day for People with Disabilities, and on the 10th is International Human Rights Day. And it feels very much in terms of, in the context of the instruments I just talked about, Maureen, and what you're saying, right? That part of what I really want your conference participants to hear from us and this panel, right, is this is the work for all of us. It's not a sideshow, it's not a panel. It's like Dawn was at a UN conference where they had women and girls with disabilities as a theme, and we said, I don't think so, we're not a theme. The majority of people with disabilities are women. 500 million around the globe. And Canada and Dawn and CCRW and all our partners are the best hope for those other 500 million women who don't have a YTF or even a choice at this point. Good practice has to start somewhere, and it has started with this program. Anna, what would you say about some of the instruments of hope that I shared, including perhaps the childcare one, the one that I was really hoping to tease out probably a bit more today, because I see it as a very important opportunity.
Yes, for sure. I think it's definitely important because it's going to allow better access to women with disabilities, single parents. We definitely see with the pandemic how much that affected people's ability to work and stay at work and do the best work when they had priorities that are definitely more important right in front of them. So I really do hope that there can be more, it'll be tangible steps that we get to take together as a community. I think that if we're taking all of these into play and how we can, individually as a program as well, really add, value add to those around us. I think our role as a program is to continue our work with employers to make them aware of some of these difficulties that I got to talk about a little bit earlier. The importance of knowing that somebody who does caregiving or childcare might need those flexible hours on top of disability related accommodations. Just that understanding of that, as well, knowing that perhaps other organizations who offer similar programs and maybe HR with certain employers might just understand the trauma-informed approach when supporting their employees, just knowing that, hey, this is a reality, and how can I make this a safe place for either my program participant or my employee. So I think those are little steps that are tangible that we can all do. We all know a manager out there or somebody in HR, but we can continue as a program to talk about these things with employers and keep making them aware of the ways that we can all work together to support people and women with disabilities.
Yeah. Well, and Yasmin, before I ask you to speak too, and I'm speaking to everybody on the panel about this, the reason I brought up all of these instruments, the housing, gender-based violence, the childcare, the national accessible, is because these are all being done in silos by different departments, by different leaders, right? And the problem with all of that, again, right, because there aren't any meaningful representations of women and girls with disabilities in policy spaces at this point, and it's all work we're trying to get done. These things are moving forward without us. These things are moving forward without us being at the center. 24% is the StatsCan number for women with disabilities in Canada. And we know if you're Black or Indigenous, it's above 30%. And so, like I said, it's for any of the policy people who are at your conference, Maureen, I want them all to go back after this and put their heads together and understand that it's like, if you're talking about housing and you talk about childcare, understand that most childcare, most shelters were built by women in communities who did the best they could with what they had. They got an old church, they got an old school, they got what they could get. It's not good enough, and it's not going to make an accessible future. We have to start to take infrastructure money and start to be cohesive in the way that we think about how we build infrastructure. And we have to start letting go of our individual ideas of leadership and get into that collective space. Yasmin.
I I definitely agree. Like when I look at all of these, they definitely all go together. Like you can't have one without the other. For example, if there's a woman with a disability, she might have to go for appointments, for doctor's appointments. She cannot go to work. She's going to miss work if her employer is not does not have the right awareness about her situation and is not flexible about her hours and her income. And with reduced income, she will not be able to afford her housing. So the housing needs to be affordable. And and then what if they have a violent partner at home? They cannot get out of that situation. So we need to end gender-based violence. Like all of these go together. And just right now, like a bit earlier, there was this one participant, an audience member, who mentioned that she has children at home with disabilities, so she has to stay at home with them. She wants to go to work. I have a neighbor who has two children who are on the spectrum, and she has to take them. She had to quit her job to stay at home to homeschool them, because the schools that these kids were going to, they kept the children enclosed. They had no access to other children. One of them started, their diapers were not changed. These are older kids.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, and one of them started having trauma, like showing symptoms of trauma, getting violent. And she's like, I have no option. Like I have visited other schools. I have no option. So the childcare, it has to be accessible. It has to be inclusive, and it has to be open, rework, let's say, on so many levels, because the mother of the disabled children should be able to access a workforce, and her children should be prepared for a future where they can live independently.
Right. And I do think, like I said, you're hitting on the key point there, Yasmin, which is this is a human rights issue, right? It's important to understand that it was a human rights issue before the government made the commitment. It continues to be a human rights issue. And if we don't understand the ableism that our folks will experience either as children or parents going into that space, if we don't work this through to the idea that, first of all, there should be some wonderful employment opportunities for people from our community who want to work in the childcare system to start with. And then add to that this idea that, like I said, what we also need is to understand there needs to be a culture shift. Because as all of us know who do this work, ableism is everywhere. And the opportunity to change that at the early childhood level is also something that represents a huge opportunity down the road for what we are talking about, which is the long view. Because if you start children together in daycare and all the children are together, well, guess what? That normalizes something that has always not been. So Tara, I'll give you a second and I'm gonna, oh Mo, you go ahead. I can tell you're just ready.
I just want to say something. I want to add on to something that Anna had touched on, and just to circle into this back into employment, and that is that it is the responsibility of the employer. It is the responsibility of the business owner. It is the responsibility of the person who wants the good talent, who wants the talent that is working in their organization to further their organization. It's up to them to change as well. Because if we're only looking, I've said this so many times, if we're only looking at the person with the disability or the young woman with a disability to make that change, that is discrimination. That is discrimination if we're only expecting the person with the disability to change and we're not expecting the system to change. We have to expect the system to change as well.
Damn straight, Ron. Well put. Tara.
I guess if I was to give a few last words is, and I believe you said it, Bonnie, is to give a little bit of hope. Those conversations are happening. It might not be happening as fast as we would like. It certainly might not be happening as quickly as we need. However, there's 143 people in this room right now. If 143 of us went out and had conversations around this topic in a polite, loving, encouraging manner, it will make a little bit of a difference. It's like that old Revlon commercial. And I told two people and they told two people. We are seeing municipalities put it in their mandates to hire inclusively. They might not know what that means, and they might not know what to expect, but at least there's organizations like Dawn that does research, and organizations like CCRW that will be able to provide those resources to say,
boots on the ground. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there is hope, and it is coming, and it is there. We've seen the government pour into this. So if I was to, with our last few minutes left, is to say that I see hope. I see people that are engaging in the process that maybe never before. One of our other supervisors in Moncton the other day just came barreling into my office, was so excited. We have an individual who is hearing impaired, working on a construction site. They didn't know what to do with this individual, so they got a little buzzer for this individual, and everybody is thrilled. Best worker they've ever had. And it's just a matter of looking past the disability and looking at the ability. And I'm hopeful, and I hope that the 143 people in this room will take that little bit of light out there and say, let's make a difference.
Awesome, Tara. Thank you so much for that. Maureen, do we have some questions from the audience?
We have a lot of questions from the audience, but one of the
you
things
have to pick a couple. So
I know, but one of the things that I want to remind everybody that in about 8 minutes, we're going to actually turn this into a networking session where all of the panelists are, of course, welcome to stay, but that we can have this open conversation with each other as well, because a lot of the comments are I don't know that they're for this panel, but they're for everybody, right? They're for a global conversation. But in the meantime, and knowing that we should we could have some questions, is let's just see. I'll pick
and
one.
Do tell me if there's somebody in the audience you want to pick on, Maureen. Feel free, because you know this crowd, I don't.
Well, yeah, well, and we'll do that again, like maybe in about 5 minutes, we'll open that up and let people come in, and I don't have to pick on them then. One of the questions is, I'm curious about with Youth of Future in Montreal, how much work with the young people is done one-on-one versus group-based learning? Maybe that's over to Anna. Yeah.
Yeah, sure, I can take it. So just to explain, there's a balance, and it depends on the individual, but we definitely have a group context for 8 weeks, everyday workshops. We promote this group context, and this is where they do a lot of learning and practicing as well. For some people, especially after COVID, you know, we're all a little bit awkward now in person, but it really is that group context, practicing our social skills, being, you know, knowing how to speak up and practicing all of these. The group context for Youth of Future across Canada is 8 weeks, Monday to Friday, but we do have a lot of time individually to work with each participant as well.
Thanks, Anna. I have another question here. It's really good that you are there for young women in their teens and 20s, but what about women in their 30s and 40s? It's a good question.
It is. So I was going to say I can answer, but I think CCRW could answer that too. My first answer would be to be clear that this is a unique opportunity that Dawn has had because CCRW put together a really strong proposal, and it was funded by ESDC and has been refunded because they've been doing such good work. It's been expanding. But I was going to say it's been focused because that was the government's desire in this particular funding space to focus on youth. Yeah. And it's not because CCRW and Dawn don't recognize that women who are at midpoint, and in fact older women, are some of the other ones we need to focus on. So I'm glad the question was asked, but it's really just the issue of what we were funded to do in this particular work in this space, not because we don't think we should be building on more work. And in fact, one of the areas I would say that we have a unique opportunity in Canada, and Maureen and I have, because we have a partner in Tammy Yates at Realize, is to focus on women with episodic and chronic illness. Because when you talk about job retention and challenges, this is a cohort of women where you have an incredible problem with job retention and poverty because of having to go in and out of the workplace because of not being accommodated and because of policy gaps.
Thank you. Thanks, Bonnie. So now we're getting lots of questions. So So lots are in the chat as well, but a lot of it seems that everything that we've been talking about and what you've been talking about today is resonating with people. So I think that this is an extremely important conversation to be having. So somebody has just mentioned that especially women that have to go to school a little later in life. So those entry-level jobs cater to a certain age, but the reality is an emergence of older or adult learners as well. We have a question here. How do we get financial supports for those with disabilities that are not eligible for ODSP? So I think that for that one, I think that that's a really good question that might not be for this panel, but it might be for, we can either take that offline. You can contact, maybe you can contact DWC strategy, oh goodness me, the email address for the DWC group, and then we'll find that answer for you. But moving on to one last question before we go into our networking. It's from our good friend Dorami, who is the MC for today. She says, she's asking, do you stay in touch and continue the peer support engagement post their term in your program? So I want to say to Tara and Anna, I'd love you to answer this question. I'd love you to answer it both ways, what you're supposed to do and actually what you're doing.
I'll speak to that. We encourage the young adults that we serve to connect back with us, to give us their stories, to let us know if they're having difficulty when the program is done. We do have a very strong pattern of making sure we're doing follow-up in the correct amount of time frames, and we're adding those results for them, but also giving space for us to be able to include other youth coming into the program as well. But we never will stop a phone call coming in from another youth. We will always look at potentially bringing somebody back on if we feel like we could serve them in another capacity in some way. We never leave a conversation not had over how we can support and encourage and wrap around somebody. And if we couldn't do it, how can we match them up with somebody that can?
Thank you, Tara. So I think with that, and Bonnie, if you're okay with it, that we can.
Was Anna going to answer too?
Oh, no? Anna, go ahead. Go for it, Anna.
I thought you asked both of them. That's the only reason I'm asking.
Sure. I'll make it short. So if we're going back to peer support, we do encourage them to continue these friendships because they're so important. And we know that some of our past participants have definitely stayed in touch, get together for coffees, and we encourage that, because that peer support, like we said, that camaraderie really does help motivate and build resilience and have them continue learning from each other and remind them what's professional and what's not. That's another aspect of our workshops, but definitely we encourage these peer support relationships.
Wow. Thank you, Anna. Well, I have to say, Maureen, this has been a wonderful conversation. I know you're going into the networking space. I probably have to step out and then I'll come back.
Sure, that sounds great.
That said, I just want to say a huge thank you to all our panelists. I also want to apologize because I did not do the land acknowledgement at the beginning of this event that I normally would have done. And it's not because I don't believe that ceremony is important, but I will say something that I think should be clear from anybody who's followed Dawn or CCRW's work, which is that it isn't about saying words, it's about actions. And indeed, in terms of one of the most important areas we need to focus on is to particularly look at the challenges that Indigenous, Black, and other racialized and marginalized women and deaf women experience, because there are groups within our own cohort that are often left out. Women with intellectual disabilities, women with brain injuries. When we start to get into really dig down, like I said, it's important to understand that we're a complicated community, but we are one big fat family in terms of the way we need to roll forward, if you will, around the kind of things that we have. Again, that idea of peer support, of resilience, right? Of rooting resilience, because if you root resilience, you root change, and eventually you root justice.
Bonnie, thank you so much for everything, for your continued work, for your dedication, for your leadership. It's admirable. So I thank you very much. I thank the rest of the panel as well. And I really do think that this was been an incredible panel. I'm super excited. I'm so happy that I got to do this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina. I think, Sabrina, what we're going to do is allow people to come on in if you want. So as Sabrina has said, to participate in the networking session, you raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. And then once you've raised your hand, you will be pulled in into this panel area. So you can put your camera on, you can put your microphone on, and then you can just come on in. We can have a nice networking chat. The other thing is that you're welcome to stay and just observe the networking. You don't need to participate if you're not comfortable in participating. Feel free to just hang out in the background as well. And I see some very familiar, beautiful faces coming on the camera right now. So welcome. So I'm just in order to have like maybe a focal point, I'm just going to re-ask the question that we're supposed to be thinking about. Of course, this is our session. We can do whatever we want with it. But we want to consider, given the greater impact of COVID on women with disabilities in employment, as we heard on the panel, right? We heard the impact. We heard the curtain's been ripped open, and we're not closing it, right? We've seen what's behind that big curtain in the back. So knowing all of this, what are some of the strategies that we should consider during COVID recovery specific to a gender framework?
I'm trying to figure that one out. I mean, I definitely, like my own experiences, I was for years, I mean, I'm in my late 40s. I became a mother and in my early 20s and had these two adult sons, one with autism, the other has a mild intellectual disability. But my eldest with the intellectual disability, he's working, which I'm glad that he is. But for me and my youngest son, it's been a long haul and a very big struggle. We're gender-based. I think I always feel like what I've come across and tried to get work was getting discriminated. They asked me my marital status. They asked me if I have children, and that's just, it's really none of their business.
No, and
I have that.
And I think that going back to what you had said earlier, and I mean, it's not for you necessarily.
I know I mentioned that. I started working as like, I was taking different courses to look after children, and, you know, whether it's, you know, children below the teenage years or even teenagers. And I got hit in the face quite badly. And that was, that's where I resulted in the injury to my nose and my eye. So I know I put myself at risk of that, but still.
So maybe we can talk, maybe I can pick up from a thread from there, Christina. Maybe we can get other people in the panel, in the room to unmute as well and join in on the conversation.
You mean,
hi, Kathy.
You mentioned gender-based violence against women, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Bringing somebody else in. I mean, I may not be comfortable talking in that.
No. Actually, so you know, and maybe you don't see it in front of you, but there are a lot of people now that are involved on the panel in this networking place that want to that also want to come in and comment and talk about
Go ahead.
talk about, but you've grounded us really, really well, Christine, and I thank you so much for sharing. Because if it's not for the real stories, what are we here for, right?
Exactly.
And so I see that Rosella has a hand up, and I also see that Kathy Hawkins had waved at me, and Bonnie has unmuted. So maybe we can go in that order. Rosella?
I'm still in my settings and I don't.
Go ahead, Rosella.
It worked, Christina. You're muted now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, my lighting is so bad, but I would like to just chime in because I have everything that you guys talked about in this session somehow happened to me. I went on 4 short-term disabilities, and my work is, in computers, and I obviously had injuries with, repetitive strain that spiraled into a lot of injuries that are work related. But I do experience the fact that I am unwell, very unwell, and got declared permanently disabled, but I am still asked to go back to a preparatory college to take up whatever course that they feel that I should do based on my capabilities. But they're trying to negate the health issues that I have, and I feel very much sidelined and marginalized. And I like the thought that, because I thought about it as well, that it is a discrimination against disabilities. And I really feel strongly about that, because it does not mean that the insurance company can just, shove you to whatever they think I should do, and negating the fact that I am still very much injured, and everything about financial repercussion and everything, mental repercussion, I already am experiencing those. So I feel powerless to stop it. And now I'm actually being faced with financial ruin. And before all these injuries, my retirement is very much well secured, and now I have to touch it. And I hope not, but I'm not getting any better, and I don't want to injure myself in the process of doing what the insurance company wants me to do. And everything is all well laid out, so I am actually on that route of having all those things that you guys talked about, because I have MDD, and now I believe it's already moderate, and I have adjustment disorder as well, because my injuries are invisible, can't see it with our naked eye, and I have to constantly prove that I am disabled, and this is not the way to go, because I already deteriorate medically, and mentally I don't need to deteriorate any further. So that's
not the way you should be treated. It's not the way anybody should be treated. And I just want to pick up, first of all, I want to thank you, Rosella, so much for sharing. Again, so important, and so brave, so I appreciate that very, very much. And for me, what you said that really resonates, and we hear this time and time again, but it doesn't really impact us. We don't think about it, because if we are people with living with a disability, then we are who we are, but we could get further disabled, right? Or people without disabilities, they're just one day away from being a person with a disability, right? It's just that you're not disabled yet. And so it's changing the entire structure of making sure that we are taking care of ourselves, right? And so
that's true.
Thank you, Rosella. Thank you so much. Bonnie, you want to react, and or is this something that you were going to say before?
I was going to say, it's really just to react to what you're saying and Rosella has said around the idea that I think, there's something that has happened in this country, which is that disability rights have evolved, right? But systems haven't.
Yeah.
We've all evolved, and we understand what our rights are, and that we have the same rights as other people, but the systems haven't evolved to understand that it's not there's a lot of gray areas that they want to fill in with black and white, which is the kind of thing they're doing to you, Rosella, right? There's an absolute they're trying to put in front of you that doesn't work and doesn't make any sense, doesn't align in any way with what your career trajectory was, what your financial planning was, or what's happened to you. You know, so it's like you feel doubly victimized because you did everything that you could, you did all the right things, and then something happened, and now you're still being re-victimized by systems that are not, like I said, catching up with the idea that the right to work, the right to be part of the workforce doesn't mean that you have to work full time and be productive 9 to 5, 5 days a week to be part of the workforce. That part of what we have to start to address is how we allow people to have the balance between work and what they need to be well and happy. And that people have that right, and we have the ability in this country to deliver that to every individual and still have a productive workforce and still house everybody. But we haven't made those choices in policy.
Yeah, no, you're right. And we have to continue to do that. That's what we're here for. That's what we need to be here for.
That's right.
Before we move on to Kathy, Rosella, I can see that you're upset, and I can see that you're, and so we're gonna see if we can get you somebody to talk to.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Kathy.
Thank you so much for being so generous with us, Rosella. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Maureen. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to talk about the question in terms of developing a gender framework and talk about some of the things that we do here in Newfoundland in order to empower women with disabilities finding employment. Of course, you know, in Dawn Canada, we talk a lot about intersectionality and what that looks like in a woman's career path. And we all recognize that women with disabilities are doubly, triply marginalized. One of the things that we've had success with, of course, is an individualized approach where we are working with women on the ground where they are, observing all of their intersectionalities and the nuances. You know, one of the number one ones would be isolation here in Newfoundland, because we have a lot of communities that are, you know, not necessarily connected well with services. I mean, not to mention we have communities right now that are physically disconnected because of our recent weather. So it's always very interesting in terms of when, you know, here at Empower, which is an independent living center, we look at ways to really start from the beginning with a woman and recognize and acknowledge all the different intersectionalities that she brings to her career path, because without that, it wouldn't be one where she would have some passion. And I think that it's really important that when we are connected to a framework for, you know, women with disabilities, that of course it's all encompassing, but that the intersectional lens has to be of paramount importance.
Yes. Yes. We're going to be kicked out of here in about 4 minutes. Bonnie, I know that you had unmuted, and I'm wondering if you want to say anything, or if anybody, I'm throwing it back to the group as well. If anybody, but Bonnie, you're on mute.
I just want to say a shout out to some of the folks that I see in the room. I see Yin, I think she's still here, as Yin Brown is still here. And I know she works at the Ability Center. So I'm just wondering, Yin, are you still there? And if you are, can you jump in for a second? It would be great to hear from you. For anybody who doesn't know, Yin was one of our leads on More Than a Footnote in the policy work. And like I said, I'm delighted to see she's, like I said, at the Ability Center now, it's my understanding, but glad to see her in this space. Oh, she's still there? Oh, look, it's like I've been talking about Yin and she's not here anymore. She's gone.
I have a question.
Sure, Victoria, please go ahead.
My name is Vicky.
Vicky.
Well, when I go to work, I do a lot of volunteer work. And one of the things I've faced as a woman with a disability, and I think my womanhood does have something to do with it, I get talked down to a lot at work. Like a lot.
Yeah.
They go like, big girl, and you do so good, and look at you, you little warrior. And I'm like, shut the fuck up, excuse my French. I feeling belittled at work, especially by my male colleagues. It doesn't happen a lot with women. It does happen with older women, but not in my age group. And I'm just wondering, is there a recourse for that? Because I feel like that's, like, you wouldn't talk to me like that if I was a man, or if I was able-bodied. So if there's some sort of recourse to be like, hey, like, can somebody talk to this guy or whoever it is and say, stop it? Because I get that several times a day from several people, and it's not okay, and it's not right, and I just want it to stop. But is there something somewhere I can go to actually get it stopped and get it looked after, or is it just something I have to, smile and nod?
You're in Nova Scotia, right?
Yes, I'm in Halifax.
Okay, you know what? I see Kaylin's on the line. Kaylin is the national manager for the Youth of Future program. We have a site in Halifax, and if it's okay with you, Victoria, Kaylin will get in touch with you, send you an email, and get you some supports.
Yeah, because I need to know how to deal with being pinned on without screaming at people and possibly losing my job.
Yeah. Nobody should ever pat you on the head.
Oh, I get
Ever.
that a lot. I get hit on the arm. I get grabbed in the arm.
Yeah.
I get dragged. I get, aren't you a big girl? Like, people have actually said, aren't you a big girl? And I'm like, I'm 30 years old. And actually, I'm 31 today. It's my birthday.
Oh, happy birthday!
Thank you. And
Happy birthday.
and I wrote a novel and I have part of a degree, so please stop it.
Please
Yeah,
do
no
not
kidding.
please don't pat me on the head. Now, listen, I don't want to get kicked out of here without, we do have to wrap up. Our session's going to end any second. So I want to thank you so much, everybody, for your participation, for your involvement, for your commitment, right? For joining us in this commitment to make sure that there is a gender and an intersectional framework that is set up in everything that it is that we do. So thank you so much from my heart.
Merci. Thank you. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Bye, everybody.
Bye.